We're now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Leah. First of all, just to go through some housekeeping committee, please be advised that we are now live streaming on YouTube. Also, during the meeting, could you please keep your microphones on mute? It stops background noise. And additionally, when you wish to speak, please raise your hand to the screen. I've got limited visual on that because I'm on my iPad, but the officers will keep an eye and then verbally inform. Also, I can't see the chat box because it obliterates the screen on the iPad. So again, if you can indicate through to the officer, then they'll help me to chair the meeting in terms of who wishes to speak. I'll now move on to declarations of interest. Before I do, Jessica Hammond is stepping in to replace James today in terms of the committee officer, and we taking the minutes. Welcome, Jessica. And on declarations of interest, could you please go through the roll call, Jessica? And yeah, roll call, and also at the same time, members, you also declare of any interest. Following that, Jessica, if you could also ask any other members that are present today if they have any interest as well. Fire away, Jessica, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have Councillor Adams.
Here, no interest to declare.
Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, present, no declarations.
Okay, Councillor Bullman.
I believe we've just lost connection with Councillor Bullman. If we come back to him at the end and see if we need to be joined.
Will do. And Councillor Catchpole.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Thank you. So I've had apologies from Councillor Hartley and Councillor Holland. So Councillor Creamy Gouvelie.
At present, no declarations of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Brilliant. And Councillor King. I can't see on the live stream. So we have Councillor Lawrence here as a substitute.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Murrell. I can't see them. Councillor Nurden.
I'm present, and I have been, I declare that I have received a wider economy grant from the Local Enterprise Partnership.
Thank you, that's been noted. And Councillor Pritton.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Riley.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Ryman Tubb. Can't see them. And Councillor Shaw.
No declarations.
And sorry, Jess, Councillor Bullman is now just joining again, so we want to hold a couple of seconds.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so Councillor Bullman, do you have any declarations?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move on to any other members present. I think we have Councillor Leggett. Do you have any interest to declare?
No interest to declare.
Thank you. And Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Present and no declarations.
Brilliant. And Councillor Emsell.
Here, nothing to declare.
That's brilliant. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you've already covered item 2 very efficiently there. I think you've already covered apologies and substitutes as well. There isn't any additional ones, is there?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very efficiently done there, 2 in one go. So we now turn to the minutes, page 5. First of all, we'll go through each page for accuracy before we move on to matters arising. So page 5, page 6, page 7.
Yes, Chair, just a few typos on page 7.
Yep.
Paragraph 5, halfway through the paragraph, it reads, a member also suggested also. So this, I suggest a second also ought to should come out. Continuing that same sentence, the member's responsibility needs to be apostrophed. And then dropping down to paragraph 7, again, very pernickety, but it reads recommendation B that underspend, and it really ought to read an underspend. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much there. So be picked up. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, and page 13. Somebody move, that's true and correct record.
Yes, I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to matters arising. Are there any? No. Great, we'll move on. Chairman's announcements, there are none. Are there any public speakers?
We've had no public speaking requests.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to cabinet reports, budget updates, second wave COVID funding, page 32, and the lead officer leading on this is Rodney, I believe. Are you there, Rodney?
I am indeed, Chair.
Oh, welcome yet again, Rodney.
Thank you very much. Yes,
fire away, please, Rodney.
So this is very much the report that will be taken to Cabinet to look for what resources needed to respond to the second wave of COVID. So very much officers have assessed internally what resource is needed as a council to help us continue to support our residents and our businesses throughout the next 6 months and indeed longer term into next year. So very much this report setting out in the table in paragraph 1.4 on page 33 is very much identifying all the additional needs that we think we have to respond to COVID over the next few months, totaling a total cost for Broadland of £264,000, which is in the bottom of that table. We also believe there's a need for to continue our extra spend on homelessness, making sure that everyone's got a safe place to stay during the pandemic. So again, we think there could be potential costs of another £43,000 there. So members will recall, we actually agreed initial budgets during the first wave of COVID, and this is very much a second ask now to increase these budgets. So you see in a table in paragraph 1.5, we're very much asking that the general allowance for COVID costs goes from 250,000, increases by 250,000 to give our new total allowance of 500,000. And similarly, the housing costs will go up by another £50,000 to 454,000. So that's very much our first ask for Cabinet to increase our budgets to respond to COVID for this financial year by £300,000 in total. Obviously, COVID is not just going to impact this year, there's going to be impacts next year as well, very much helping ensure that our businesses and our residents can recover as quickly as possible. Therefore, we believe there's a need for actually some additional resource over the next year into the 21-22 budgets. And again, that's very much detailed in section 2 of this report. Obviously, at this time, it's quite difficult to be very specific on some of this need, but we believe that actually there's probably a need to continue with up to about an extra 10-15 members of staff in order to actually provide a high quality response to this pandemic. And that's where we're asking members to actually provisionally agree that for next year's budgets, we should be expecting to spend up to £350,000 on our COVID response. And the idea being we would fund that from the council's reserves. The next element of the report is section 3. As members will be aware, at the moment, we're obviously holding all our meetings virtually. When we are back in a position to hold them either in the council chamber or in a hybrid session, we're actually expecting that actually meetings will start being held hybrid. So actually some people in the council chambers and some people from Zoom. What we've found is that virtual meetings work quite well and they're all on the same sort of systems. We all do it through Zoom. But when you have a mixture of some in the council chamber and some working virtually, our current IT setup in the council chamber is not really good enough to support this and provide a good experience. We're obviously doing some initial work on this and actually what would we need to do to facilitate these meetings. And we are very much at early stages, but we're suggesting that actually if we need to do this correctly and properly to provide a good experience, then we may need to set aside up to about £50,000 to actually invest in the technology in the council chamber. So that's very much our next ask of Cabinet, to increase the budget to allow for that. Section 4 of the report then very much actually tries to give a summary of where we are with the financial impact of COVID overall. This table is very much just relating to the general funding. We've obviously got lots of other funding streams that are covering particular projects, but this table is very much just setting out how we're using the £1.6 million of general emergency funding that central government has provided ourselves. So as you will see from that table, we've had £1.6 million worth of income. We're allocating nearly 1.6 of that money out. In addition, we're estimating we've got some lost income, the net position being £216,000 lost income for the council. We have identified some savings, but overall for the council, we actually expect to be about £85,000 in credit at the moment from our funding from what we actually have spent. Obviously, that's quite tight and things might change as things go on, but essentially we have at the moment been able to cover our costs relating to COVID from the government grant that we received, but it is quite close, being sort of £85,000 out of a total budget of £1.6 million. And that very much summarises the report. Obviously, the requests are going to be to increase our budgets to respond to COVID, both this year and next year, and to consider investing in the technology in the council chamber. And I shall pause for questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Well, we'll just open it up now. Are there any questions?
Councillor Nurdon's indicating, Chairman.
Grant, wherever you are, I can't see you. Fire away, please, Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Just looking at the report on page 33, you've got a table there showing BDC cost and then on a column for South Norfolk costs. That's in section 1.4. When it comes to the rest of the report, is there a separation between, because you talk in paragraph 2, that members are therefore requested to agree 350,000 coming from the council's general reserve. Is that going to support officers working on both councils? In other words, if we're going to be spending 350,000, for example, how much is South Norfolk going to be spending out of their general reserves, or is that not applicable?
Okay, Rodney.
So, as I said, it's a lot easier to identify our need for the current year, which is where we've been able to provide that lot more detail between the actual individual items for Broadland and South Norfolk for the current year. But you are correct in that actually we are asking South Norfolk as well to increase their budgets for COVID by again £350,000 next year in order to support that COVID funding. So there's an equivalent ask for the South Norfolk Cabinet. But that £350,000 is very similar to our requirement for the current year. I'll say, again, the split being fairly equal between the two.
Grant, you okay?
Councillor Prutton has a couple of questions, Chairman.
Sue, you.
Thank you.
Fire away.
Sorry, two quickies, please. The first one, can you, in your table on 1.4, just enlighten me what BAU is in the bottom of the final line of the table on page 33?
Business as usual. I do apologise.
Oh, all right. Sorry.
But you're right. we really shouldn't be putting abbreviations in without actually having them expanded. So
well, a glossary at the back might help. And the other one, on page 34, it's third box down. You talk about the NDR. I don't think you mean the Northern Broadway, do you?
No, that's a non-domestic rates.
Thank you very much. That's question 1. Question 2 is a little bit more alarming. 3.3. You say, furthermore, if members wish to progress this quickly, it will be necessary to reprioritise existing IT projects. Which one? Like not rolling out Office 365 or anything, as we've been talking about earlier this week. What seriously though, what might have to be put back if we are going to bring the chamber up to proper standards?
Unfortunately, I don't think we've got Emma on the call for this meeting, but essentially you'll be aware that our IT team are doing an awful lot of the projects, and they will need to actually have a look at this.
I think Debbie has a hand raised.
Debbie wants to respond.
Debbie?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are a number of projects, as some members are aware of, that we're currently undertaking, from things like Office 365, the infrastructure work, which is a massive piece of work they're doing, rolling out of laptops, well, rolling out of the IT for both members and staff, that additional laptops we said we needed for staff, and obviously all the work that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks with yourselves as members around the requirements for members going forward. So there is an awful amount of work. This would be additional on top of that work, and at the moment our resources are fully deployed. So it would be a matter, if this is wanted to be taken forward very quickly, that we would have to look and see what we can't continue to do, and obviously we would have those discussions with CEC around which things we stop. But no, we wouldn't want to stop the Office 365. That's a vital piece of work that needs to be done, but it may hold up some of the other pieces of work like the infrastructure. So yes, it's a decision we would have to take.
I'm relieved to hear your assurances on the Office 365. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. So just for me, actually, the point, the report you was just the point you was just making, which line and which page was you referring to?
Paragraph 3.3, the final paragraph on page 35.
Yeah.
Which starts, a project therefore needs to be undertaken, and it was the question, the final sentence that I was querying.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, got it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I lost a little bit of connection there, so I just lost the sound for a little while. Thank you, sir. Yeah, it's in the same vein, really. We've got a report here going to Cabinet. I've not heard anywhere else in any other meeting, any other report, where the questions being raised, do indeed the council want to go down the road after COVID of going back to full council meetings and not zooming in? So we go back to the old governance on that, or do we actually want to allow where members can attend and not can attend via Zoom and not be in the council chamber after COVID? I've not seen a report anywhere where that proposition has gone through to a cabinet member in the first instance to then arrive at a study to see if this is feasible and how much it would be. So I'm taking, I don't have cabinet members present at the moment, I'm taking it that the discussion has happened with a cabinet member, and there is a view apparently from what I'm seeing here, because it's going to cabinet, that indeed that would be okay for our council in terms of governance as well after COVID.
Debbie's got a hand up to answer
Brilliant.
your question there.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's not just about members necessarily being in the chamber. It's the fact that obviously, as we've been recording these, all our committees, actually it's given greater transparency for people to look at the decisions that are taken by members in the various committees, because, you know, it's not just about them being able to see at the point those decisions are made. They can obviously go back on and see those in a week's time, 2 years' time, or whatever. And so I think it's more about actually continuing to actually put out there on YouTube the committees as they happen, so people can see democracy, and it opens it up a lot more to people perhaps that can't make it into the council chamber.
Okay, so we know that in other councils, and we know that county, for years they've been doing voice recordings for transparency out to the public, irrespective of COVID. So the premise, the proposition I'm seeing here is, the direct proposition is for members to be able to attend in the council chamber and have the technology so that you could also zoom in and attend that meeting after COVID. That seems to be the main thrust here, because it actually says it. It actually states that here. So I understand about transparency issue, but we can record those meetings anyway. We don't need somebody to be on a Zoom and not attend the meeting to be able to record them. We can just do that anyway via the equipment going ahead. But I'm just wondering about the urgency around this as well. We're into the second phase here, and on governance, we don't actually have a position around that. All we've said so far is, and it was via a motion, it was via a council full debate, is that when we record meetings, it will be left on. There is a review in a year's time, but it'll be left on. That's all we've said so far. So I'm just not quite understanding where the government's coming from on this. That it seems like we're being led by a report, but I'm not hearing where the governance is on that. And have we actually gone back through? Do we need to go back through to the council or cabinet in terms of governance about to enable that to happen and have a debate about it? That's the bit I'm not understanding, Debbie, at the moment. Emma's not. I think Emma's away at the moment, isn't she?
Yes, I'm afraid Emma's on leave at the moment. I think that there was something that came, I would need to go back and just double check, but I believe at the last council meeting just recently, there was an amendment to the constitution that made that applicable if that was allowed to go ahead. At the moment, my understanding is that legislatively, there is a date by which at the moment we can hold virtual meetings too, which I believe is the end of May. End of May. So obviously, if this was something then that the government decided they wanted to do, so obviously there needs to be legislation in place to allow us to do that. It was whether we look to hold a combination of both at face meetings, as you say, but with the opportunity for perhaps members to be able to join electronically, as well as making sure that those meetings are available, as I say, digitally for people for public and that to look at either at the time or not, or in the future. So it is elementary at the moment. We need to do a piece of work to actually ascertain what type of cost it is. So the 50,000 is really a marker in the sand. If that's a project that members would like us to take forward, what we're saying in that paragraph is, if it's something members absolutely want us to do very quickly, we would have to look at stopping something else to enable us to do that quickly.
And I think it's that point. So I'm picking up. I'm linking the two with Sue Prutton's remark, which I think's got his point is relevant. Actually, I really do, because if you look at what's going on here, if you look at where we are in terms of finances, etc., is this something that we should be diverting away from anything else in order to be able to do this very, very quickly? I'm not quite understanding that. Also, I don't understand the urgent need for it. We're into lockdown here. We've got the issue with government in terms of May as well, and I'm not quite understanding a priority that seems to be inferred here that perhaps we're not aware of here at Scrutiny, because this is Scrutiny. So this is why I'm asking the question, you see. So obviously the portfolio holder, I'm guessing, must have had some discussion about this already for the report to be coming forward. Who's the portfolio holder covering this? John. Wonderful. I'm inviting you in, John. Wonderful. Could you just expand a bit on this for us, John?
Sorry, I've got quite a lot of noise at my end, so I was just trying to mute things happening here.
Oh, much appreciated.
The last conversation we had regarding obviously coming back to meetings was we heard that parishes were starting to have meetings, and the current guidance is that we aren't coming back to meetings. So at the moment, there is no plan to bring members back in for meetings because the current guideline says that if you can get away with it, you don't. So there will be no urgency with this. We will work on the other IT projects, and we will look at this as a more of a springtime. If things do start happening where we bring people back, the hybrid, we need to make sure that we can do the hybrid. So there isn't going to be any rush urgency on this. This is just to make sure that we've got the hybrid in place if we need to. But the current guidelines coming from only a couple of weeks ago were that if you can Zoom to stop having the meetings, that would be the best way forward. And I believe that Emma did message out to the parishes to say, if you are having meetings, it is not suggested that you do, because some of the members were saying they'd been at meetings, and the feeling was that that was probably not what they should be doing, but they needed the guidelines. So that was sent out to them to say, really, should you be having meetings? And as Broadland, we won't be having meetings together, but to have a hybrid plan in place, just in case we get to a point where we can have meetings and some members still feel uncomfortable or some members still want to be on Zoom, that would give them the access, the same as what they do in a Parliament, really.
So John, just one point, again, just the funneling on that question, yeah? You remember this, Mona. So just taking that point you've just mentioned, thanks for that clarification, it's really helpful, actually. So we are talking about moving to tier 3 or whatever you want to call it, or tier 1. We've got some members that I'm just popping that out there to see if this is what we're talking about, and we've got some members that are should be self-isolating. They're in that risk category, but we've got all kinds of restrictions lifted, but we've still got some members in that situation through age, whatever. So we're talking about that kind of situation where members are now beginning to meet in the chamber. We've got some other members that are at a risk category and they are best still to self-isolate. And is that the situation we're talking about, John?
Yes, but obviously it's such a movable feast. If we're looking at 3 or 4 months down the line, it's going to be very difficult to know what is going to be happening. But that would be how I would see it, yes. That if we then start having meetings and we've still got vulnerable people, we will need them to still be not in the council chamber. So that is something we have to consider.
Okay. And just the last point on this. So the intention then is not in terms of governance that we eventually go down the road here of COVID's over. We've had the vaccine. It's gone past, a thing in the past, all gone. We're all happy this time next year. And we're now into a government situation where we're in the chamber and there are some members, nothing to do with COVID, who just prefer to sit at home and come off the computer and Zoom in. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, I guess that would be to do with if that was allowed. Obviously, if they're requested to come to a meeting and they say, no, I can't be bothered, I'm going to do it online, that might be that situation where that would have to be agreed that could happen. Again, we've talked about how we're now live streaming on YouTube. That might be that if we're going to be doing that with meetings, to make the meetings more publicly accessible so that members of the public might want to watch them but not come into the building. Remember that we don't have much attendance at public meetings. So that would be, if we're then having the capability to do something so we can live stream, that would then also work with that moving forward to make the meetings more accessible to the public. But this will all be considered. Like you say, we haven't heard anything about this so far. This is all going to be considered moving forward.
Okay, so really then we'd have to come back in terms of governance and where you want to go down that road at some point in the future, Jonathan, yeah? Okie dokie. Right, and we can reflect that in the minutes as well. Thank you, Jonathan. Right, anybody else on this point?
Councillor Bullman has had his hand raised for quite a while.
And so had Councillor Tony Adams. Sorry.
Okay, so we've got
Councillor
Nigel,
Bullman was
Sue.
first. Councillor Bullman has raised his hand. He was first. Then Tony Adams.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Then Nigel.
Can you hear me, Dawn? Can you hear me, Linda?
I can.
Yeah, I was just about to, I'm just trying to communicate back. So what I've got here is I've got Nigel. I've got, tell me if this is right. I've then got Sue Hatchpole.
Yes.
And then we've got Tony Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Is that anybody else?
And Councillor Bowman,
Councillor Bowman, thank you.
who's had his hand up for quite some time.
Right. Okay, right. Nigel, has Peter been in first, did you say, or not?
Yes.
Oh, right, Peter, you fire away first.
I was going to defer to others, but I'm quite happy to come in first. Looking at 1.4 in the paper, a number, in fact, all of the increased resources for people are based on full-time equivalents. The costs are obviously, I'm assuming, only based on the remainder of this current year. Is that correct first?
That is correct. The costings are based on 6 months.
So if we're going to assume that these posts are going to be required in the next financial year, there's going to be quite a significant increase in cost, which is not reflected here. That's correct, isn't it?
Not all of these.
We're actually allocating a part of the year resource costing for what will be, I assume, a full year costing next year.
Some of these resources are required for 6 months. Other ones are required for longer than that. So actually, we're not expecting all these posts to continue for the full year. A lot of these we are hoping there'll be a short term just to get us over the peak winter sort of a COVID issue.
Okay, but it doesn't say which are short term and which are long term, does it? Or have I missed it?
Not directly, no.
Well, I think we would need to know that, wouldn't we? Because we are potentially, I know it's not us, it's the Cabinet that are making the decisions, but potentially we could be looking at a significant increase in headcount and resourcing, which is the seed of it is here.
Chair, if I might help Rodney out and explain a little.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Bowman, excellent question. And I think in one point, if I'm reading it correctly, so you're probably, I think, looking at the top 3 rows, which are the people-related resources, where it says in the texts, 2 FTE housing and solutions officers to meet demand need likely to continue for up to 18 months. And then the third one down talks about the same in terms of community connected capacity, also need to employ for an 18-month fixed-term contact. So I think
the rest don't. It says one full-time equivalent in HR to support bank of agency staff and recruitment of staff.
So I've
no idea how long that's required for.
My apologies, Councillor Bowman. I was just answering your question in relation to the people side because I can talk more succinctly to that because it was my need for support. So I think the intention there is to look at roles that deal with both the presenting issue of COVID, which we can anticipate would be at least the next 6 months, depending on what happens after Christmas, post-lockdown, third waves, fourth wave, who knows. But there's also this ongoing seed of demand caused by the economic downturn, which is a consequence of COVID, but obviously is a much longer term proposition. So when we're looking at those 2 housing solutions officers and those 2 community connectors, we're thinking about the way in which we can best support people for the I know short to medium term in terms of what they're having to face because of the situation they find themselves in. So that's kind of the logic we were trying to work through in terms of what the resources might be. The other thing I would offer to councillors is that, from my point of view at least, we put this forward only as a worst case scenario. We would obviously only call down on these resources for the length of time that we really and truly need them and look to return to the baseline budget as quickly as possible.
So am I to assume then, looking at all of these requirements, and there are quite a few of them, I would imagine there are a dozen or more, that most, if not all of them, are short-term requirements, not long-term requirements?
That would be correct. Where they are the long-term requirements, that's where we've tried to say likely to continue to need for up to 18 months. So for instance, the one about the HR support, that's only for a maximum of 6 months because it doesn't say it's 18 months.
Okay. Gets me a bit worried when you see things which might be a very open-ended commitment taking us into the next financial year at substantial extra cost, when we may not have the money to fund it. But I have your assurance that all of them, or most of them, are short-term.
Perhaps, Chair, I could just add, if it helps, that's in section 2, that's where we've asked for the additional 350,000. That is to cover those posts that potentially might go on beyond the 6 months. For instance, things like the HR post there, the 1 FTE for the HR, that's to get us through recruiting all of these posts, but also in addition, we think we're going to have to recruit some additional staff for the elections, because if we have to do them in a COVID way, for instance, we have to make sure at the polling stations that we manage the number of staff that are actually physically in the building, for instance. So we may need some additional people on the door and that type of thing, and to wipe down areas once people have voted. So that there's quite a bit of work around us recruiting people on a temporary basis to help with the election. So that's what that particular post is around. Now that will go on to elections, and so that is 6 months there. But in section 2, you can see there in 2.2 where we've said that up to 18 months, there are some other areas that we need to have some additional staff in on a temporary basis for the 18 months around the housing service, the community connectors, the housing benefit service, where we're seeing that increase in demand, and we anticipate that will continue for at least over and above the 6 months, and that's why that additional 350 request is in there to cover that additional staffing for those temporary posts.
Okay, Peter. Right, move on to Nigel.
I think Chair Tony had his hand up long before I did.
I've got Tony down. Do you two want to talk about it? I mean, which one wants to go first?
You can go first, Nigel. I'll
Okay.
follow.
Yeah, mine should be brief, hopefully. Yes, we can just dwell on 3.3 just for a moment longer, please, Chair. I'm just a little bit worried about the first sentence. Thank you, Rodney, for the report, by the way. But just that first sentence, a project therefore needs to be undertaken to work out how to improve. Okay. And this is likely to conclude that we will need to invest in new equipment. Is that not what is termed in legal parlance leading the witness? May I suggest that second half really ought to be taken out, because until the report is undertaken, we have no way of knowing whether we need to invest in new equipment. Or am I being pedantic again?
What we, sorry, Chair, to interrupt, what we do know is that we can't hold hybrid meetings successfully with the equipment that we've currently got. So if you want to go down that route, we will have to invest. I mean, that's the decision for members to make, obviously, and we will take you know, once we do some preliminary work, and that we will take that through the CEC committee on to cabinet.
I agree, Debbie and Chair, but it just worry if we're going to have a project undertaken to see what we need to do, surely we should just have a project, because it is at the same time feasible that the project might say, well, actually, no, we don't need to invest anymore. We've actually got what we need laying around the building already. I just do worry about that. It's almost saying that we're going to have the report, but we're going to spend money anyway. And I think that should be out, in all honesty. But I'll leave it to committee to make that decision.
Yeah, and just for let Tony come in, it's exactly my point, Nigel, as well, that this is the problem with the report. What I'm not seeing is that, you know, it's really, you know, it's the context of this, isn't it? That you know, is likely to conclude, but we are setting aside now in the recommendation, you know, we're setting aside this £50,000 in case. It just seems to me that we've got the flexibility, Rodney, that within this council, that if a report was to come back, be debated, gone through all report stages, CEC and ONS and then cabinet, that said, oh, in actual fact, we've now got a demonstration, this is absolutely needed, and these are the criteria that we'd be setting it up for, including the governance issue that I'm talking about as well. That would then now requires us to agree to £50,000. That seems to be the right way around. I think this is what Nigel's saying, and it's on the same point. The point seems to be, you know, the cart before the horse here was 50,000. We haven't quite worked this out, but we're agreeing to 50,000 now in case we do work it out, and it's likely to be the case. I'm not used to that in terms of operating. Rodney?
Yeah, I think, as you say, we're very much at the early stage of this project, and that's why we wanted to get a steer from members as to whether or not this was something it's worth us investing time in order to actually come back with options for what we can do. Obviously, we're just trying to make you aware that actually, if we do go ahead, there could be a significant cost involved. And obviously there's impact on what else we do for IT projects. So it's very much a gate point. We're asking for members to make a decision. Do we proceed to continue to look at this, or do we actually just park it and come back later on and focus on other priorities? So it is very much a gate point decision whether we start this project or not.
Yeah, but I understand it, really. But the point that's being raised here, and Sue's made the same point. I have in my way as well. We've got some answers from Jonathan, which are helped in a way, because it cleared out, where this is going. And also Nigel's point is that recommendation 4.1 to increase the BDC 2021 information technology capital budget by £50,000 to improve the technology in the council. There it is. It's actually a pretty firm recommendation. It's not saying if, when, or but, and possibly, and we haven't worked this out yet. We're testing this by the members. This is actually a proposition going to Cabinet. Jonathan's a portfolio holder, so he must have been involved in that. And that's our problem, I think, here. It seems all a bit kind of, we're unclear about this. Where's the governance on it? Does this mean, is this also not relate to COVID whatsoever? This just means this is the road we're going to go down. All that surely needs to have a debate. I mean, we could have a situation here over COVID where the government says, do you know what? You don't need to attend the council meeting. We end up with members for 4 years sitting at home. Well, we can all do that, and you end up with empty council chamber forever and a day now. When all you've got to do is what other councils do if you want interest in transparency, which is actually cheaper, is simply, live stream what goes on in the council chamber or record what goes on in council. That's happened in other councils before COVID. Didn't need to have the ability for members to go on Zoom at council meetings. They're two separate issues. You can live stream, you can broadcast, you can disclose to the public just by cameras being on the whole meeting. I mean, you don't need to do any more than that. So there is an issue here, and I think the points that Sue Prutton's made and Nigel and myself, sort of pointing to that. Not Tony might be on the same point. I don't know, so I'm going to stop there. Tony, I'll let Sue catch Pauline next, and then Tony.
Thank you, Chair. It's not on that particular issue. Okay. Going back to 1.4, I have a few questions. One is I think this is for Rodney. He suggested that both councils were taking 300 or proposing to take 350,000 out of their reserves. But obviously this table includes a very big sum, 140,000 for waste service staff. It says South Norfolk Council only, and I'm not one to be divisive, but I just think that could we have an explanation of that, please? Surely that should fall just to South Norfolk. And then on the second page, on page 34, there's 4 extra full-time equivalents to backfill consultancy roles where officers are redeployed. That's quite a large sum, especially if it's only for a few months, of nearly £100,000. So please, could we have some explanation about exactly what level those people are being recruited to, and could that not be filled by lower grades, if that's the right word? People working already in the council could get more experience of working at a higher grade, perhaps. And then an expansion of our economic development team. We're already aware, we've been told that it's understaffed. I think I heard by about 6 members of staff already.
Eight, Sue.
8 now, is it? So is that £100,000 to make that up, or is that extra on top of those vacants? Sorry, that's my phone. I'll have to turn off.
Yeah, would you like me to respond?
Please, Rodney.
If I
Thank
take
you.
the first and the last one, and I might get Hannah to come back on that consultancy one. But the first question was very much about that £140,000 for the agency staff to the waste service. As you'll see in the table from 1.4, that full cost is allocated to South Norfolk. There'd be no element of that cost that would actually come to BDC. That's purely a SNC cost. The third question was about the economic development team. That extra £100,000 is to expand the economic development team over and above the current establishment. So it's not about recruiting to the current vacant posts. That will be done as a matter of course. This is about increasing it over and above what we would have done otherwise. And the second point was about the consultancy roles. I don't know, Hannah, if you want to take that one.
And Ralph, for everybody's information. Fire away, Hannah.
Thank you, Chairman. So just on this point, as members will be aware, in terms of the first wave response, we had to redeploy a number of members of the programme management team and consultancy team to support that key work, which meant the transformation and BAU projects had to be paused in order to support that. In terms of the overview that Rodney gave in terms of this report, this is absolutely about getting the balance right between ensuring we can respond effectively to our communities and businesses, but also continue to deliver the transformation and business as usual projects. So in terms of this resource is specifically for programme management, and the plan is not to recruit immediately to these roles, but to have the funding available if there are new initiatives that come through central government, or there are requirements by teams within the wider organisation, be that community, be that economic development, that we have funding available to be able to bring in project management if required to support key projects that come forward as a result of a COVID response or COVID recovery, rather than having to pause transformation or BAU activities again. But we're not looking to recruit to those immediately. It will be only if there are new initiatives or new pieces of work that come forward that require that additional programme management resource, which is absolutely critical to deliver those projects as we found in the first wave.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just a bit concerned that that sounds as if the key priority is to push forward as fast as possible with the transformation, as we call it. But is that really necessary when we're going to be very much reduced in our income next year? Should we not cut our cloth and perhaps just not try to run so fast with this transformation project, but spend the income in a more constrained manner, given incomes are going down?
Would you like me to come back on that, Chairman?
Please, Hannah, yeah.
So in terms of what we're delivering against, that is the updated delivery plan that was agreed by members a month or so ago, in terms of the updated delivery plan that came through to Cabinet and to full council. So as part of that, it was updated to reflect the COVID response, but also those transformation pieces of work and progressing that. I take your point around the budget challenges for the council, and I suppose part of the reason for progressing with the transformation work is to support those budget issues and to deliver longer term savings, which why pausing the transformation at this point would perhaps lead to greater challenges further along the line. So that's one of the main motivations for continuing the transformation at this time.
Doug, all right, Sue. Okay, Tony, at last.
Yes, Thank you, Chairman. As you, well, I think a lot of this debate really is circling around how successful the injections are for on COVID-19. It proved to be effective, and there's a very fast sort of turnout of people being inoculated. And I think we might be looking at returning to the council chamber probably September, October time, depending on how many of us have had the dreaded jab. But that's by the by. There's one thing that does puzzle me, and as you know, finance isn't exactly my strong point, my intellectual imagination. I leave it to others who've got a far better grasp of it than I have. But there's one thing that does puzzle me. It says that 3.3 sort of the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. If members wish to progress this quickly as upgrading the council chamber, it will be necessary to reprioritise existing IT projects in order to free up capacity to implement this. Yet you go to the recommendations, and this one really, Rodney, is for you, and it is a very good report. By and large, I can understand it. And any report that I can understand, you have to be a genius. But it says that you intend to increase the budget by 50,000 to improve the technology in the council chamber. If we're putting £50,000 in the budget to do that, why would we then need to reprioritise other IT projects? I might be being a bit thick here because I usually am when it comes to finance, but I just thought I would ask that particular question.
Rodney?
Thank you, Chair. I think what we need to reprioritise is the officer time to implement these projects. It's okay going out and buying lots of new cameras and microphones potentially, but you still need the staff in order to be able to actually develop the systems, implement it. So it is very much, we might have the money to do it. We need to have that IT staff resource to actually implement it and actually make sure we deliver something that would really work. But I think building on the comments from the chair earlier, this might be a recommendation that actually you as a committee may wish to actually consider putting an alternative form of words over.
Yes, thank you. I think we're heading there because listening on the contributions, you know, I'm supposed to sum up on the contributions I normally do, and I've been listening to them here and their direction. And I'll come on to that in a moment. Just before I do, so we can conclude this, is there any other questions?
Right. Yes, Chairman, you've got Councillor Shaw and Councillor Nerdon and Councillor Kelly.
Right, so Shaw, sorry, Nigel, far away, Nigel Shaw.
Thank you. Yes, looking at the figures, and extra staff. Now, presumably the staff will be working for both councils. So how much has been asked from the South Norfolk Council? Because if we're paying all of it, I'd expect the staff to be working just for us.
Rodney?
So in this report, we're asking for the general allowance for COVID costs for Broadland to go up by £250,000, which is in line with that table above. For South Norfolk, we're asking for £450,000, which is again in line with that £468,000 in the table in 1.4. So there you see there is a different ask for the two authorities depending on what we estimate that need to be.
And how about the equipment for, you know, okay, for us it's 50,000. How much has been asked for South Norfolk?
That report is obviously, that's going to be 50,000 as well. The idea being each council chamber will need a different solution. And it could be that actually this one's independent. So actually Broadland may wish to pursue this project, South Norfolk may not. I say these are completely independent options for the two members to decide upon.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Again, just picking up on that point, because there's a scrutiny point on this as well. Absolutely, Rodney, because there's also about subjective judgment and also about where you go in terms of members and a policy or a view around should they really be in a council chamber, or now do you want to move down the road where you can, after COVID, not attend if you don't wish to, nothing to do with COVID, and attend via a Zoom meeting. And of course, each council can have its own determination on that. They can either go down that road or not go down that road. And that's the bit that, again, I've kept coming back to all the way through this. Who is going to make that judgment? Is it councillors, finally, at the end of the day? Is it just cabinet, or who? That's the point we're trying to get back onto as well. So next one was Grant, and then Ken.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually a follow-up on a question that Sue asked, and then also points that were raised by Peter Bowman, and then also what Nigel's just been talking about as well. Going back to the 1.4 and 1.5, we're talking about those being short-term posts and costs, etc. And then in the opening 2.1, it says it is increasingly clear that the effects of COVID will continue for many months, if not years. And then we're asking for 350,000. And from what Rodney was saying earlier, that the same ask is being asked of from South Norfolk. So the question I'm asking is, if we're going to have those specific areas that need to be covered in the short term, and it's possible that that might go on forward into the long term, are we not saying that the ask from Broadland's general reserves of 350,000 should not be in the same proportion going forward, because we're now saying that it's going to be if the short-term ones is 250, is 264,000 for Broadland and 468 for South Norfolk, then surely theirs should be a lot higher, because they have got those same sort of costs that they're going to have in the short term, they're going to have in the long term as well. So just if Rodney can just clarify why their ask from the General Reserve is going to be the same as what we're asking from Broadland's General Reserve to fund these costs that may go up in the years to come.
Rodney?
That's a very good question. I think the key issue is the current year asked for South Norfolk. There's a large sum in there of £140,000 for the waste service. We're hoping that that will be able to return to normal fairly quickly after sort of in March, April time. So there won't be that need for South Norfolk to continue to actually have that additional costs there. And if you take that 140,000 out, that comes a lot closer to the equal split between the two authorities. Hopefully that helps.
You got that, Grant? Yeah. I did also see flash up a 36% here in some chat, I think, from Karen as well. So yeah, okay, thanks. And Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit put out about the fact of, asking for 50,000. And if you're looking as well for the council actual building itself at Thorpe Lodge, in the earmark reserves on 2.1 we see there, we got 322,000. Now, if I remember rightly, in debate in which we've cost and queried the leader of the council, we don't know where we're going to be in a year's time, because there's a study going on, I gather, that possibly we may not be in Thorpe Lodge. So my worry is we're going to be putting all this money out and about, and the fact is that we're not going to be here. We could be in county council, we could be anywhere. So why are we spending loads of money when we haven't had the study completed to find out actually where Broadland itself will end up? And we're talking about possibly September, when, if at the very earliest, when we go there. We need to have something in place to tell us exactly, are we going to be in Thorpe Lodge and need to spend this money, or are we going to be somewhere else? I would like somebody to comment on that, please. Thank you.
I think the only person present, I'm just trying to see who the officers are here with the role and responsibility closest to
Chairman Debbie Lorimer's indicating.
And I was just going to say, is Debbie Lorimer?
Yeah,
So,
Debbie. Yeah.
Debbie, would you come in, please?
Yes, of course I will, Chair. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Kelly's quite correct. We are undertaking, we will be coming back to members with a feasibility study around the longer term plans for accommodation. But obviously, with COVID and everything, this is a much more at the moment in time potential need that's coming up, because as I say, the legislation only goes to the end of May. I do believe anything that we do longer term around the accommodation will take several years actually to come to fruition, but anything that we would put in obviously would need to be potentially transferable or portable to whatever new place, if indeed we ever do go to a new location. So I think, yes, we absolutely need to bear in mind what Councillor Kelly is saying about making sure we don't waste money. But as I say, I totally agree, there will be that coming forward, but I think the need might be more pressing in the immediate around us potentially having hybrid meetings. And this is about, as I say, undertaking in the first instance a bit of a feasibility study around what we potentially might need in the council chamber, and just saying, that would in itself will need a little bit of money to do that, because we'll have to get some experts in to look at what potentially we might need before we come back to members.
Okay. Well, again, just on this point, again, it's a very prescriptive sum of money, 50,000. So I know what Rodney and yourself, Debbie, are saying about, and Jonathan as well. Well, no, actually, Jonathan has not said this, in fairness, Jonathan, about a feasibility study around this, but that's not what the report is saying. It's not what the report is saying. And point 4, which I've mentioned, and also Tony's mentioned as well, is actually got a figure in there, 50,000, so if I'm doing a project, I do a feasibility study to arrive at what the need is, and then that gives me how much I would need in terms of a budget. But what we've got here is a budget of 50,000, but we've got an undefined, do we actually, what's the feasibility study? This is pretty worked out already by looks of it to have come up with 50,000, or is it just a guesstimate that possibly it's going to cost 50,000?
Chair, it is literally a guesstimate. I believe it could end up being a lot more, and I suppose it was just putting a figure in the sand for somebody to sort of say it's going to be at, I suspect potentially even more than, I think it's one of those things, it's how much do you want to spend. What I don't think it will be is small change. And so, members need to be aware if this is something they want to embark on. I think you are talking about a considerable sum. But as I say, I think the need might be more pressing, and it's where do we go? We don't want to be sitting here in May and then making a decision. I think we need to start thinking about this now, potentially, and working up something now, so that we're down the line, if the legislation does change and members do decide they want to go for hybrid meetings in the future, not only to enable members to have that freedom of potentially not sitting in the chamber, but also, as I say, around being more transparent for members of the public.
Yes, I have to say though, this has been said 3 times now, and we know that councils do not have to operate a hybrid where you can have members sitting at home and other members in a chamber to be transparent with the public. You don't need to do that. So the two are being linked here. So what I'm saying is that one does not mean you have to do the other one, and being transparent and then publicly broadcast, and does not mean that also means necessarily that therefore you have to do hybrid. There's a governance issue in terms of that, and a judgment to be made. And each council's, I'm tracking the councils around this all over the place, and I've been for about a year. So they are all thinking about different options at the moment, and some are going down the road, well, when we go back, we'll be in full council. Oh, and what we'll do is we'll keep on broadcasting. And they're going, well, no, we're not going to do that. Others are doing hybrid. They're all think, but it's actually a subjective judgment, and about a judgment of, I guess, the executive, which would be the cabinet, and whether that comes back to full council in terms of you or not, I don't know at this moment in time. I'm actually going to bring this to a close, Debbie, because we're losing time. It has been an important bit of scrutiny, this, but I will bring it to a close. What we seem to have got, I've got 6 people now who have come in, particularly on this point. There's been other points made. Caroline, sorry, Caroline, I've missed you. I'll let you in and then I'll.
Sorry, we did have
I'll
3.
sum up.
We did have in chat Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Karimi Guvenlu, and also Councillor Bullman has raised his hand.
Okay, and I would appreciate this administration at some point providing me with a laptop so I can chair a meeting in a functional way. I really would prefer that. So Karen, we've got Karen. Sorry, who else did you say?
Caroline.
Sorry, we've got Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Karimi Guvenlu, and Councillor Bullman.
Peter, okie dokie.
Yeah.
All right. I won't take women first because they haven't spoken before, Peter. So you have. So I'll take you first. Yeah.
Ever the charming chairman, sir.
Thank you.
My comment is quite simply this. I assume sooner or later we will go back to normal council meetings. However, Debbie probably is better able to comment on this than maybe I am. But it seems to me that there will be a number of councillors who, for one reason or another, will have reasons, physical reasons, why they will want to continue shielding and things like that. It would seem to me that legally, if they are required to come into a council chamber and therefore put at risk, we have not made reasonable adjustment in the eyes of the law and therefore could be subject to discrimination claims. So I'm assuming that whatever we do, we will have to make some provision for people who cannot, because of their physical disability or whatever, attend the council meeting. Debbie, would you like to comment?
If you're happy, Chair, for me to respond to Councillor Borman. Yes, at the moment the legislation, as I say, only goes up to the end of May, so we would be looking for government to make that legislative change to allow us to operate hybrid committee meetings. But certainly we would want to put the interests of the health and well-being of our members at the foremost. And if that was available to us to do, I think that would be one of our recommendations. I think as well, it's perhaps just goes greater than committee meetings, having the ability to do virtual meetings with people, whatever those meetings may be for, even for maybe a really good thing to invest in. But as I say, we will do a feasibility study and bring those back to CEC and that for members to have a discussion over that.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Yeah, and they're 2 different issues, Peter. They are really 2 different issues. We've got the issue about COVID and we're not quite fully out of it. And then we've got the issue of when we're fully out of it, are we in a government situation where we're saying at that point, it's okay, you can do a Zoom meeting, you don't have to attend, even though there's no COVID issues. And it's that half of it as well that needs to be sorted out under governance at some point. And about whether the council want to agree to that or not. So there's the two points. So okay, so we've finally got Karen and then Caroline. Karen.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, really. I've just totted it up, and it's 23 full-time equivalents, and none of those are shared resources. Question, and the second question follow on for that is, this is the 23 equivalents are to ensure that existing staff no longer have to work overtime. And so my question is, really, are existing staff working equivalent of 23 FTEs? So what's it seems quite a lot of extra staff requirement once you kind of tot it all up. I was just hoping to have a kind of a comment on that. And then I have just totted up the numbers, which is excluding the 140k and putting the total, which includes the homeless response requirement, that the total there is 683,000, of which Broadland District Council is 307,000 and South Norfolk is 381,000, which remains the 45%, 55% split, which is before. But my question is, that has been estimated as 700k requirement, and sort of requiring a 350k extra budget from Broadland District Council. So it's just that the numbers don't really add up. So perhaps I'm doing it incorrectly. But on first, perhaps there's a different way that the numbers need to be presented in order for them to make a little bit more sense. So I'd like a clarification on those 2 points, please. Thank you.
Rodney, could you clarify, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think the first point was about the 23 FTEs. These are between the two authorities. So actually that is 23 in total. I think it needs to be put in context of actually between the two councils, we have nearly 700 staff. So actually, what's that? That's about a 3% increase in resource. It's not 23 staff sounds a lot, but actually when you take into context the size of the organisation and the amount of response that is going on. And you were saying about staff working extra hours. There are a lot of staff working long hours, actually making sure particularly the Help Hub is doing sort of I think it's till 10 o'clock at night and over the weekend. So there are a lot of resource going into a lot of key areas. So I think actually the 23 is in proportion to the need at the moment. With regard to the presentation of the figures, I think you're right. Actually, you probably could have been clearer on how I presented this information. Some of it is very much because actually we are learning as we're going along, and I'm sure the need now will be slightly different to the need in a couple of months' time. There will be new changes, new requirements being put upon ourselves. So this is very much trying to put that ask into context of what the need will be. But I'm sure there will be changes as things change over the next sort of a few months and indeed sort of into next year. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, just one point. Karen, are you okay with that?
Yeah, thank you. That is.
Yeah, just one point there. The 3% on the 700. I'll just a bit more accuracy on that from my point of view. Of that figure, we're talking about here staff, COVID situation, cover, etc. Part of that figure, of course, in South Norfolk is the old term for it is the blue collar workers that are working in the waste, which are purely, on waste, emptying the bins, driving the trucks. So really, when you take that figure out, the figure's a bit higher than 3%. You'd agree with that, Rodney? Yeah?
I'd agree, yes. If you take it just to the non-leisure, non-waste staff, it's higher than that. But it's still not a 20-30% increase in establishment. It is a lower percentage.
Yeah, it's around about 6%, roughly. Okie dokie. Rough calculation there, too. All right, thank you. And Caroline?
Hi, just a final question for Rodney, please, on the homelessness response requirement. It states 96,000 for both councils, and you're estimating 16k a month to be spending on this. In my calculation, that only covers 6 months, that 96,000. And you're saying the need is to continue up to 18 months. How are we going to fund that for the next year after that? And do you envisage the 16k a month to continue at that rate?
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That table in 1.4 is very much showing that 6-month cost. The extra 12-month cost will be in the ask for the 21-22 budget. So that will be part of that £350,000 we're looking to set aside for the following year. So we're very much trying to split this report into additional pressure this year and the pressure next year. And I think you're absolutely right that the homelessness costs and the pressures will decline over time. And actually that will be higher in April and hopefully declining back to normal levels by sort of September, October next year, depending on the fallout for the economic situation.
Okay, thanks, Rodney.
Thank you. So I'm just finally going to ask Linda, are we done? Because we need to move on to the recommendations and summing up here. Do you think we are?
Yeah, no more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think after this one, we'll take a comfort break, and I think we'll catch right up after this one. Okie dokie. So we've got the recommendations. Excuse me. Page 38. Cabinet to recommend to the council. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Recommendation 4. I'm going to come on to that in a moment and see whether we're happy with that or not. I've not heard any points around 1, 2, or 3. Could I first of all move 1, 2, and 3 that we recommend those to cabinet? Seconded.
Steve?
Yes.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just say that is that 350,000 in number 3 the same 350,000 we've got in one of our questions to cabinet?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so if we accept this recommendation, are we then negating asking cabinet to think about the question?
What question are we talking about? Can you just clarify for everybody?
At the end of the agenda today, we're looking at the questions for cabinet.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And number 7 is asking, is the 350k provision for COVID response in 2022 sufficient, and what assumptions were taken to get that figure?
Oh no, we're fine on this. So because this is about the formal report which is going through ONS and then to cabinet. So we need to take a position on this. Our question to yes, good point, Rose. Our question to cabinet on forming the budget moving forward is that sufficient? So it doesn't actually contaminate this, so it doesn't cause this problem.
Okay.
So yeah. So I think I've moved. And I think Tony second. We're happy with 1, 2, 3 recommending to cabinet as is. Please show.
That looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Okay. And on 4, you might all be happy with this, don't know, but picking up on, well, I've got six points around here and all seem to be converging on the same thing. I think Sue Prutton first raised the points around this, but they seem to be centering around 2 points. One, that this should be subject to a review, and I think that Debbie's already indicated that a review is going to take place. So that would tie up really with what Debbie's saying as well. And I think what Jonathan was indicating when he said this would go back through SEAC as well. So unfortunately, recommendation 4 doesn't actually say that. So we could clarify that. And what we could have is an amendment there where you've got recommendation 4 as it is, then with an amendment saying subject to a review, subject to a review, subject to a review and a review of governance, point, and then end. Then also picking up on a point that I think a number of members have mentioned as well, this should not result in other projects being delayed, other IT projects being delayed. So that would be the second one. Because we've also got a very important project going on, members IT, and we've got to function as we are without being in the council chamber, and we wouldn't want to see that delayed either. So could I just ask, just before I ask for a second around it, could I just ask, our committee officer if they could just read that back?
Yes, Chair. So you have obviously the recommendation 4 with the amendment of it being subject to a review and a review of the governance. And a second amendment that this changes shouldn't result in other ICT projects being delayed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okie dokie. I'm going to put that. Have I got a seconder around that? Yes. Okie dokie.
Councillor Kareem had a hand.
Sue Prutton, I've picked up on my screen. Yeah, okie dokie. Take Sue. Thank you, Sue. And then I'll put that to the vote now. All those in favour, please show.
Looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. And
Councillor Brennan, I don't think was.
No, I can't agree with that, Chair. Sorry.
Okie dokie. So you abstain or you're voting against?
I will vote against because that's not answering the question that I first put about this particular issue.
Okie dokie. All right. So thank you, Nigel. And then just on the wording, you did say and the governance. It should be and governance, I believe. Thank you. Right. Wonderful. We'll move on there. Thank you, Rodney, on that. I'm going to take a comfort break because we're about there for that, and then we'll speed up after this. So I think we can make some pretty speedy process. So what time have you got, Linda?
It's just
synchronized
11:26. Shall we say? Yeah, 11:26. Did you want to say 11:30?
Well, that's 4 minutes. Let's make sure we are really all back by 11:35. Yeah.
Could all members and could all members mute themselves and turn their cameras off, please?
Right, I'll make it 11:35. Jessica, could you just whip around for us, just see who's present, make sure everyone's here, make sure everyone's back. I mean, excuse me.
Yeah, I'll do a roll call. Councillor Adams.
Here.
Councillor Brennan.
Present.
Councillor Bullman.
Here.
Councillor Catchpole.
Here.
Okay. Councillor Creamy Gouvelet.
Present.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Lawrence.
Present.
Okay. Councillor Nerdon.
Present.
Councillor Pritton.
Present.
Councillor Riley.
Present.
Councillor Shaw.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all members of the committee present.
Thank you very much. So we move on to the next item, business rate pooling 2021-22, page 38. And I believe that's you again, Rodney.
It is indeed. Thank you very much. As business rates pooling, it's not an easy subject, but probably worth me just trying to explain what the general concept is of business rate pooling. So the general idea is with localization of business rates, if we manage to grow the business rates income, money paid by businesses to ourselves, then actually we get to keep some of this growth. So for instance, if the development in the district increase and there's economic growth, then say our business rates income grew by £2 million, we would normally get to keep £1 million. However, if we join a pool with other authorities, then actually we get to keep more of that growth. So again, if we had £2 million worth of growth, we might be able to keep, say, £1.4 million of it. So there will be a benefit from pooling. So for a number of years now, this council has agreed to pool with the other districts and county in Norfolk in order to create a business rate pool in order to retain more of this growth. And since we started pooling in 2014-15, this has ensured that we've been able to keep an extra £28 million worth of business rates funding in Norfolk. And what the Norfolk authorities have agreed to do is any additional growth that is retained, we fund it in, or we put it into the joint investment fund to fund projects across Norfolk. So every year we need to review the decision as to whether or not to continue to pool our business rates. So this not only depends on what we do as a district, whether we have growth, but whether we're expecting to see growth in the other partners that we'll be pooling with. So very much in section 2, this is our best estimates, which very much saying that we think that if we continue to pool, Norfolk could benefit up to about £3.8 million by retaining more of this business rates income. The downside of pooling is very much if our business rates income falls, then actually we could tend to lose out more than if we didn't pool. And it's not just about whether our individual business rates income goes down, it's about whether the business rates income for any of our partners goes down as well. So obviously there's a risk that we may do well, but by pooling, we share the risks and opportunities for Broadland, for South Norfolk, for Norwich, for all the other people who are in the pool as well. As I say, in the past, this has definitely been proved a good thing to have done, but next year, obviously, it is more difficult. We've got the issues about the economic recovery, the income that's going to come from business rates, how many companies are actually going to be struggling to pay business rates, and we may need to have to write off business rate debt. And the other issue that's still not finalised is about the Nhs Trusts. So the Nhs Trusts lodged an appeal a number of years ago to exempt them from paying business rates. They've lost the initial case, but it's still going on. They've won the right to appeal. So there's still the possibility that if they were to win their case, then actually we would lose potentially £20 million from the pool within Norfolk. We think that risk is unlikely in that actually they have been unsuccessful in a number of court cases, but until that legal avenue is completely closed, we can't be guaranteed of that. So very much the issue is we still think based on current figures there is a benefit from pooling, but members just need to be aware that the risks are higher. Section 4 also sets out actually what our time frame is. So we've had to already tell government that we are still interested in pooling, However, we have until 28 days after the government gives the provisional finance settlement to make that final decision. So we're expecting that provisional finance settlement sometime in December. So sometime in January, we will need to make that final decision as to whether or not we continue with this pool or whether we withdraw from the pool. At this stage, the only option would be for the pool to collapse. So if we pulled out, or indeed if any other the pool members wanted to pull out, the pool would collapse. So we need to be aware that if we make the decision to pull out, then actually that would make sure the whole of Norfolk is no longer in a pool. Given this time frame, this is very much where we're coming to members actually to agree in principle that actually, yes, we think it's a good idea to continue to pool, and the initial figures are suggesting it is. The Section 151 officers across Norfolk will be updating these figures as close as possible to that final deadline to make that decision. So we can have the best figures when we make that final decision. But we are very much asking for a delegation so that it's myself in consultation with the leader and the portfolio holder for finance could make that final decision to pull out of the pool if necessary. We would only do that if the latest version of the figures that we'll do in December and early January show there's likely no longer to be a benefit, but we need to be able to react quickly at that point in time. I think she'll pause there for questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Yes, what I can see on my screen at the moment is Grant and Nigel Shaw.
Chairman, you've also got Councillor Bowman and Councillor Shaw and Councillor Pratton.
Okay, so right, Grant, you fire away, and then you after that, Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just two quick questions. If one of the other Norfolk authorities pulls out, is this all a waste of time exercise? And then the second question is, I was under the impression we were part of a pilot dealing with the non-distributable rates or business rates. What happened with regards to that pilot? Are we still part of that, or are we not part of that anymore?
Thank you, Chair. If I can respond to them.
Yeah.
Two very, very good questions. Firstly, yes, if any other partners pull out, then actually the whole pool collapses. The one that is potentially most likely of pulling out would be Norfolk County Council, because they would be the ones who potentially have the biggest loss, because they bear the biggest share of this. So the risk to them is a bigger number. But at the moment, all the authorities are still committed to this, but obviously everyone's reserving the right until we see the final numbers before making that final decision. The second point was about being in a pilot. Absolutely correct. Yes, we have been in a pilot. I say that pilot was only available for 1 year, so we've now reverted back to pooling decisions. So basically the difference between a pool and a pilot is actually under a pilot you keep an even greater percentage of your business rates, and we've gone back to that standard pool, which is 50-50 sharing arrangement.
Moving on to Nigel Shaw now. Nigel, far away.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, considering everything, I would say this is a very good idea to carry on with it, especially considering that we can pull out and others can as well. But what I need to know is, can we pull out at any time, or is this just until a certain cut-off period?
December. Rodney, as far as I know, we're talking about December, and you've got 28 days notice, but is that correct, Rodney?
It is. We will need to have made a decision by the 15th of January to be in or out. Once that decision made, that is then fixed. So actually we would then be committed to be in a pool for that 21-22 year. So whatever happens, if it's good or bad, we would be sort of liable for that. So the key cut-off point is about the 15th of January.
Well, in that case, could I ask, what is your opinion on what to do here?
We've got the recommendation, Nigel.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just asking Rodney for his personal opinion.
I think that's reflected in the recommendation.
that is indeed sort of thing. It is very much. We can still see the benefit of Section 151 officers across Norfolk for the pooling, which is why we are all recommending to all the members in Norfolk to continue with this, with that caveat that we just want to see what comes out in January.
Yeah, the reason I asked that though was because if you consider all the businesses that are closing, especially like with Arcadia, for instance, this is going to have a ripple effect, and there'll be a lot more companies closing, I would think. So how is that going to affect it?
Okay.
Rodney.
That is indeed the big risk. So the saving grace in some ways, it's a landlord who ultimately will have responsibility for paying business rates. So even if a property is closed, then actually there's still a liability to pay business rates on an empty property. The risk is more that actually someone goes into liquidation and has a debt of unpaid business rates, which then has to be written off, and that will obviously affect the amount of income that comes in.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make there, because obviously Arcadia has gone into liquidation, and it seems like the normal way for a limited company to go. That way we would get nothing from anybody that goes into liquidation. So it does seem a little bit tricky.
If I can just come back on that one. If companies go into liquidation now, then that will be a hit against our current year business rates. It's even more difficult because if we're looking forward to 21-22, so potentially we're looking at the risk of companies defaulting in 21-22, which is a bit more crystal ball gazing.
Yep, exactly. Okie dokie. Right, I'll move on to Peter, I think was next.
Thank you, Chairman. In essence, what we're being asked to do here is to bet on the futures market. And the futures market actually is looking pretty ropey. Our risk, if we actually come out of this pooling arrangement and just focus on our own business rates, is less than if we stay in the pooling arrangement where Norwich and Norfolk actually carry the greatest risks. So actually, I'm minded not to continue with this pooling arrangement because I think the risks are probably too great. For point of information, those two businesses were mentioned are likely to be in administration, not liquidated as yet, but they quite possibly could be. So my view is, I think this is a bit too risky.
Okay, thank you, Peter. We've got Sue Prutton next, and then I did manage to pick you up, Sue Catchpole, on my few boxes on my screen.
We've also got Councillor Lawrence, Chairman, who's asked a question in chat once we come to that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. Brilliant. Okay, so Sue Prutton, would you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Rodney, for yet another clear report. I do understand your reports, yeah. And I think I speak for everybody.
Yes.
Just explain to me, please, if any one of the partners in the scheme drops out, it is, as you say, the pool collapses. And say we are disadvantaged by someone else dropping out. Have we got any recriminations against them? Have we got any claims against them, or is it just one out, all out, and we still love each other?
So there is no repercussions if it's a collective agreement, and actually that's just part of we've had the benefits in the past from the pool, and actually this is just something from the governance arrangements. And actually this has been discussed quite a lot at leaders. Leaders have been fully briefed on the pool, and actually they're trying to work collectively together. So I think actually it's more likely that actually if the figures didn't stack up, then we would all collectively decide to pull out, rather than one person just saying we don't like the risks.
Heat collapse. Okay, Rodney, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And then now we have Sue Catchpole and then Karen Lawrence. Sue, fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to get my head around what is the worst case scenario. Say we all say yes, let's pool, and it starts or carries on. then what's the worst thing that could happen, please, Rodney?
I can tell you what the worst thing that happens. If you're not in a pool, you'll basically have a safety net. So actually your liability to lost business rates income is limited to 7.5% of your income. So that is the default floor. You could never go under if you're outside of a pool. If you're within a pool, that 7.5% reduction applies to the pool as a whole. And therefore I'd have to work out the shares and how that would work individually. But it's actually, it will be significantly higher. Actually, our loss would no longer be maximum of 7.5%. It could be 15, 20%. It could be quite high.
Yep. Okay,
thanks.
So thanks. And then Karen.
Yeah, thank you. My question is in terms of, is there a plan to actually kind of do an analysis on the vulnerability of businesses in each of these areas, in terms of just kind of to understand more clearly what our risk is going forward, in terms of sort of, you know, the vulnerability of pubs and tourist venues, which have been particularly hard hit, and to understand, you know, in terms of making this decision, and I suppose planning going forward, if we're relying on the business rates, what are our vulnerabilities in those of other councils in Norfolk? Is there a plan for that kind of analysis, or is that just a bit of a fag packet calculation?
Just for your answer, Ronnie, just to help again point in terms of Karen's question, in the recommendation, the point is, and I think this is the direction that Karen's in as well. If the latest modelling undertaken by Norfolk authorities, so that's the collective authorities, so could you sort of respond to Karen, and then also that point about the modelling, Rodney?
Well, thank you, Nigel. We haven't done detailed modelling as been suggested, but what we've done in table 2.1, you'll see the right hand column about the percentage reduction to move into a safety net. That gives an indication of sort of what sort of swing we would need to have for an individual authority for them not to be beneficial to be within the pool. So for instance, for Broadland, we would be looking at potentially a reduction of 4.7% from our current levels of business rates income, for it then not to be sensible for us to be pooling. But as you'll see, the big ones are Great Yarmouth and Norwich, which are actually a lot closer to being in the not being beneficial to be pooling. So it's those areas that we've got the real concerns about, actually what would be the impact in those two areas.
Yep. Okay. Is there anyone else?
You've got Councillor Brennan, Chairman, and Councillor Catchpole.
Right. I'm going to let you in first, because it might be related to what you previously wanted.
It is. Thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Okey-dokey.
Just to ask, what is the total projected business rates? Because you were mentioning figures of 7.5% or 15 to 20% as a potential loss. But what is the total projected income from business rates for next year, just to give us an idea of how much we are talking about?
So the total business rates income for Broadland is in the region between 25 and 30 million pound. I haven't got the actual figure in front of me. However, we don't keep all that. We actually only keep 2.9 million of that. That's our baseline. But in the past, we've actually been benefiting from about £1 million worth of growth. So essentially, we collect 30 million. We keep about 3 million of that, plus an extra £1 million because of the growth that's been in the district.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to pin you down now, Rodney, sorry, but if the potential maximum loss is 15%, which is double the maximum potential loss of 7.5% if we're not in a pool. How much does that actually equate to, that 7.5%?
That'd probably be a reduction of about £2 million in our business rates income from that 30 million.
Oh, not from the 2.9 million?
Not from the 2.9, no, it's from that overall amount that we collect.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
from that to its logical conclusion, we're probably looking at around about 300, 350, something like that, Rodney, directly to us.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, just take the percentage down and then that factors in, because we don't retain all the 30.
It doesn't work quite in that proportionate fashion. It is a case of, although we collect all this money, the risk is all about that differential between what we expected to collect and what we actually collect, and that full impact of that differential is what hits our bottom line.
Yeah, okie dokie.
I think I probably should also mention that we've got a business rates reserve. So actually we have set aside money, as you'll see in the later report that Maddie will be presenting on earmarked reserves, that the council has in the previous years set aside money to actually cover some of these risks. So actually we have got a reserve there available if the worst happened and we did end up with a potential loss arising from the pooling decision.
Okie dokie, right. Nigel Brennan, I think you were the last one. Just before I let Nigel in, I'm actually going to ask now, because we do need to wrap this up. It's 5 to 12. Is there anybody else that wishes to come in? Please indicate now, otherwise I will move on to recommendations after Nigel Brennan.
Chairman, you've got a question from Tony Adams in the chat, which we can come to.
Okay, so we've got Nigel and Tony, and then that is it. And I'll move
Nobody else is indicating.
Okie dokie, thank you. So Nigel and then Tony, and then we move to recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just fully accept recommendation 7.2 about the ability to withdraw at some point if it doesn't come to fruition. 7.1 says in principle to continue with business rates pooling. But if we then go back to the report itself, 2.1, it says in there, it is important to note that the districts have highlighted significant uncertainty and or limited confidence in the forecast. So if the districts are really basically saying that these forecasts aren't of any value, why are we proposing that we just go ahead with it? Those two things don't seem to chime together with me. Sorry. I may be being dense, but they seem to negate each other.
Thank you. I think it probably we could have done with making that a bit clearer. The idea actually, we have got no reason why actually we're against pooling in principle, as a general concept. We'd have no objection to working with our parties, with the other parties in Norfolk, as we have done in other years. Obviously, we could actually politically make the decision, and actually we no longer want to do this out of principle. So that's why we're just saying actually we've got no fundamental reason why, if we can make the figures stack up, why we wouldn't want to continue. And that's what I'm asking for that first recommendation for. And the second one is very much more about, well, actually, even though it looks like it's a good idea at the moment, we still want to have that sort of get out clause if possible, that flexibility.
Yeah, it's an enabling clause, isn't it, to have that flexibility.
Thanks, Rodney.
And now, and Tony, your last one.
Yeah, quick question, Rodney. Obviously, Norfolk County Council, I'm a county councillor, so I am declaring some sort of interest in this, but they are part of this polling of rates, etc. And yet they would probably have to take quite a big hit if things go a bit screwed. I just wondered why there's nothing in the table relating to where Norfolk County Council are, etc. Their share of risks, etc. Just a quick question.
Again, a good question. Essentially, it's because the districts collect business rates, the county doesn't collect business rates, it's a district function. So essentially the county council shares a proportion of each of the elements. So they get a share of the Broadland business rates, get a share of the Broadland business rates, etc. So actually they get a proportion of that overall amount that's actually collected by the districts. But you're absolutely right, they do bear the biggest gain and potential loss because they have a bit of each of the individual sums.
Thank you, Rodney.
Okie dokie. Right. Well, just summarising from the debate and moving on to recommendations. I've not picked up here, excuse me, directionally, any indication of an amendment really here or a absolute no whatsoever. The way I'm reading this, and I'm really contributing this up to now, is that we're doing this at the moment. There is a risk. It's agreeing to continue it in principle, and basically this enabling clause, which is a functionality issue really for Rodney and the leader and portfolio holder. If such evidence, in a material way, something comes forward, say, within this time frame, which is a short time frame up to December, and then going through to about the 15th of January. That's the key point there as well. We can't forget. In that short time frame, then you've got the ability to pull out, and it's an enabling functionality really that we're enabling here. And on that basis, I think that makes absolute sense for whoever's running the council, to be honest with you. Whatever the political persuasion of anybody running the council, it's a functionality which I think needs to happen. And therefore, I would move the two recommendations, 7.1 and 7.2. Is there a seconder for that? Okie, Tony, and it looks like thirded there by Nigel, Brendan. Okie dokie. All those in favour, please show.
Looks to be unanimous apart from Councillor
Peter.
I'm voting against, I'm afraid.
Okie dokie, Peter.
If the recommendation had said to continue in principle with business rates pooling, I might have supported it, but I'm not supporting 21-22. I think the risks are too great.
Okie dokie, Peter. Also, Peter, just to say you're always welcome, because I didn't hear a proposal really or any substantial in summing up. So I apologise if I misread that, but I don't think I did. But you're always at liberty, of course, to put forward a proposal yourself, Peter, as well, of course, as we go along. Okay,
indeed, but given the way the vote has gone, I think that would be pointless. So I'll just register that I don't support it.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, I meant prior to that. Sorry, Peter. Thank you. Just being courteous, Peter. Okie dokie, thank you. Right, we'll move to the last cabinet. Excuse me, cabinet.
Chairman,
Hello?
there are more recommendations, 7.1 and 2.
Pardon? I'm losing you, Nigel.
There are more recommendations, 7.1 and 7.2.
Yeah, we just did that.
I thought we did the first ones.
No, we did both. So I was moving 7.1, 7.2.
Okay.
We did just vote on that, Nigel.
Yeah, I was looking at the first ones.
Okay. All right, Nigel. There's not a joke behind this anywhere, Nigel, because I know you. Okay, thanks. Right, moving on to the last cabinet report. Review of earmarked reserves. And Rodney, you're having a rest at the moment on this one, aren't you?
I am indeed.
Madeline, you're leading on this?
I am, thank you, Chair. If there are any questions, then Rodney will be jumping in at some point. But good afternoon, everybody. So the earmarked reserves report in front of you is basically a revised version from the one that we presented back in November. So I'm hoping that everybody's quite comfortable with the content. So I was just going to move straight on to the recommendations, but if anybody has any questions, then please let me know. So there are 3 recommendations within this report. The first recommendation is in relation to the bridge maintenance reserve, and it was requested for visibility that we separated out the values that were linked to Marriott's Way and the values that linked to the Bure Valley Railway. So the idea is to basically split this reserve into 2 so that we can see what is attributed to which one. On the second recommendation, it is to put in some additional monies into the reserves. Firstly, 1.3 million into the IT reserve, and this is to support potential investment that we know is going to be required for updating a number of the IT software applications. The second recommendation is for 5 million into the reserves for the Broadland Growth Reserve, which is to support potential new housing, which is an ambition, I think, for Broadland Growth. So this is basically to support this initiative. And the third recommendation is the creation of 2 new reserves. One is to support the refuse services, which is currently undergoing a procurement exercise or project as well, and that is for £3 million, which will be to help fund and purchase the new fleet of vehicles, and also any improvements required to the depot to support that. And the second creation of a new reserve is for the Food Innovation Centre, which is a project underway at the moment for the food hub, which is basically it's now entering its REBA stage 3. And the submission today actually for the ERDF funding is being submitted as well. Pause for any questions.
Thank you. I've picked up Nigel, and I've also picked up Grant. If I could just ask two questions first of all.
Yeah.
I want to catch I've got you now as well.
And Councillor Lawrence as well.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else you picked up at the moment, Linda?
And Councillor Brennan.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. Yes. Could you just first of all, on the fleet of vehicles, as you know, the councillors, this has been supplied in the past under procurement process with Viola, who provide the vehicles, and then there was debate during the waste contract discussions about whether we was going to go down the road of an LATC or whether we was going to go down the road of procurement. There was a decision and thoughts around, should we actually own the vehicles ourselves, because there could be a saving there in terms of the what we can borrow, etc., as opposed to the companies owning them themselves, the service provider. So I'm taking it that there is a thought now clearly here, and with the portfolio holder, I'm guessing as well, that is actually in Broadland's interest financially to purchase the vehicles for the first time, and that we own them outright. So is that correct? That it's actually financially beneficial for us to do that rather than let the
Can I pass that to Rodney, please, Chair?
Yeah.
Yes.
So at the moment, our proposal is a part of the waste tender documents to go out with 2 options. One very much saying to the potential contractors what would be the cost if we were to buy them, and the second one would be what would be the cost actually if you were to buy them. So actually we're going to have the 2 options, but we are expecting, based on our soft market testing and our discussion with contractors, that us buying the vehicles will be the best financial option for the councils. But until we're seeing the procurement tenders come back, we can't be certain of that. So that's the first point. The second point, though, is even if the contractor was to buy the vehicles, as these vehicles would basically be only used on the Broadland contract, from an accountancy point of view, it's as if the council owns them, because basically we've got all the benefits of ownership, as in these vehicles are being used for our services. They'll be all liveried up in our BDC livery. So actually, for all intents and purposes, the council will have the risks and rewards of ownership of these vehicles, and therefore it's likely that we will be showing these as being assets of the councils anyhow. That's quite a technical accountancy point, but regardless of who actually buys the vehicles, they could end up being an asset of the council, either legally or from the accounting regulations.
Okay. Okay. So I think it is worth recording that reply, Rodney, in the minute for clarity, because the document's not fleshing that out rather. But basically, there's two options. This is going forward. You're going to ask this in the procurement process, and if it's financially beneficial, then this would be the road that you go down. Hence the sum of money, Rodney. Yeah. So if we could have an accurate minute on that to reflect it, because it's not flushed out in the report. You see, it's not fleshed out rather in the report.
Can I come back on a second point as well? Because obviously, when these vehicles are purchased, there's obviously different ways we can fund these.
Yeah.
We could borrow the money. We could set aside money in a reserve to help cover the cost, or we could pay for them through additional contract payments to the contractor over the life of the contract. So again, what we're suggesting here is this £3 million reserve is just been set aside to actually help cover the costs of these vehicles. It doesn't necessarily mean that that will be the actual outcome we'll go for. And indeed, the likely cost of the new refuse fleet is going to be more than £3 million. I'd expect more like £5-6 million for the number of vehicles we need. So not only if we were to do this, would we have to fund some of the cost of the vehicles from the reserve, we may need to borrow as well to cover the full cost of the vehicles.
Yeah, and leverage around the capital outlay. So it may well be, Rodney, what I'm reading here is that it may be beneficial to borrow at the low finance rather than fully finance out of capital reserves. That may be a consideration. Is that correct?
That is, but obviously we have limited reserves, and that's part of what this paper is demonstrating, in that actually when you look at that summary of changes in reserves, you can then see, based on this report, actually out of our total £25 million worth of reserves, £20 million of them will have already been set aside for specific projects, which only leaves us £4.5 million to use for other opportunities or budget pressures.
Yes, I picked that up, Rodney. Thank you very much. And just one other point. So again, if we could have a full minute on that, please. Just on the IT. Again, the report doesn't really sort of flesh this out. Could you just give me? Could you just expand on that a little bit in terms of? You said it's for software upgrades, 1.3 million. Over what period of time are we talking about? And what software upgrades are we referring to? Does it also involve other things, or is it just software upgrade?
Can you pick this one up again, Rodney?
Again, this is where obviously you haven't seen the information yet about what we're proposing for next year's capital budgets, but essentially we're suggesting in future years we'll need to be setting aside some money to do some of our software replacement programs. So for instance, our planning system, we may need to upgrade that, or our finance system. And that's where we're looking at this piece of work with it methods, looking at our overall strategy for what we're going to be doing with our software going forward. And that report may then say, actually, there's some opportunities to make some savings if you do a joint system for planning or for building control or for finance. And therefore, we need to be setting aside some money to actually give us that ability to invest in our IT systems in order to put, if the answer is a single system in place for the two authorities, if that will generate efficiencies going forward. So this is very much setting aside some money in advance of that report that we coming to members about what the capital programme will need to be in future years.
Okay, and is that report coming forward for the for budgetary reasons in January, February, or March?
That's the one for February, yes.
February, right, okay.
But obviously we are quite well advanced with that internally, which is why we're bound to come up with that 1.3 figure, which is basically a £350,000 for, I think, 3 or 4 years. It's a potential ask.
Okie dokie. And the IT reserve doesn't include the 115,000, the 35,000 that's been set aside. That's different ring fenced money.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so moving on, Nigel, you is first. Fire away, please.
Thank you. I was just thinking on the bridge repair budget or reserve budget, how much of that money is actually spent each year?
As far as I'm aware, there's been limited spend on that every year, but I think we are conscious that there are some potentially significant works that need to be done to the bridges, but unfortunately don't have that information to hand.
Okay, Nigel. Grant, you is next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the proposals on 3.1 to 3.5, and I can accept the bridge maintenance reserve. I can accept the IT reserve. I can accept the refuse service and the food innovation. Well, I'm very curious to know why we are creating a reserve for a loan that we're going to be making to Broadland Growth. Surely that all the other reserves are for actual expenditure money that we're not going to get back. Whereas with Broadland Growth, it's a case of we're going to take £5 million from our treasury management funds, our investment funds, and we're going to give it to them with every intention of getting every penny of that plus interest back. So to me, that's not real capital expenditure. It's just a loan. And so why do we need to create a reserve for a loan? That's my question. Thank you.
Rodney?
Okay. This is again where we have these odd local government rules. So yes, I agree, it's basically a loan, but from local accounting purposes, the fact that we will be loaning the money in order for them to be doing some capital work will mean we'll have to show this as capital expenditure. But the idea is that this money will be paid back and therefore replenish this reserve. So it's an oddity of the local government accounting. In many ways, you're absolutely right. It is just using £5 million of our money, but we need to be able to set aside that reserve, that money to do it.
So once the project is finished, are we then going to say, right, okay, we've got £5 million back in this reserve. Are we going to then put it back into some other reserve, or is it just going to be a reserve for the sake of having been able to lend that money?
A good one. I think we're still working through the proposal about exactly what we want to do with Broadland Growth. If we have some investment of, say, £5 million, will that be a one-off, or will it be the aspiration of the council to actually have that as a rolling fund, so actually now do one development and then actually repay that, and then we'll loan it again for another development? So we have done 2 developments to date. What is our appetite for pipeline projects going forward? Because ideally, to make it sustainable, we'll be having a pipeline of projects coming through from Broadland Growth in order to continue reinvesting this money to deliver property and, as you say, to deliver a return.
So I guess really, Grant, what you're saying is your next point, I guess, would be on the 5 million, that's a rolling seed capital, if you like. It's about to capitalise the projects. What is the return on that 5 million on a rolling basis? 3-4%, Rodney, roughly.
So I think it could be slightly higher than that, because in order to avoid sort of a state aid rules, we need to make sure that any loans to Broadland growth are on a commercial rate.
Right.
So it could be anywhere between 4-6%, depending on what the commercial rate would be.
Okey-dokey.
Follow-up question. Sorry, follow-up question. With regards to what Broadland growth do in the future, does that mean that this this reserve could, well, I presume in year one, it's just going to drop by 5 million because you're going to invest there. But then they might have a second project that they want to start in the next year as well, which means that we're going to then have to lend them another, say, 3 million. So that means that they've got loans of 8 million. And then in year two, for example, they repay, say, 1 million, but then start another project. So is that reserve possibly going to be going up and down? Is it ever going to say, right, okay, this is what we're going to be spending over the next 3 years, say 5 million, and they're going to borrow, say, 2 million in the first year and a further 1 million in the next year, but they're going to repay 500,000, for example. So is the reserve going to remain at 5 million, or is it going to be fluctuating up and down as and when the council has changes in its ambitions to provide housing?
I think this will very much depend on what proposals come through from Broadland Growth to what they think they can deliver. I think you're absolutely right. There will be fluctuations over time. This £5 million is a marker in the sand to say, well, actually, that's the sort of level of investment we'd be looking at. Broadland Growth might come back to us and say, well, actually, they want £3 million and 5 and 7, and we'll need to consider that when that proposal comes in from Broadland Growth. Obviously, it's a decision of how much we invest through Broadland Growth. We could say £5 million, we could say £10 million. It's a decision very much to try and set that envelope for what sort of level of risk and level of investment we want to make through Broadland Growth. And that £5 million is very much the level that's been seen as a reasonable first start for this. But obviously, if Broadland Growth is really successful, then actually there could be a real business case for expanding that quite significantly. And indeed, your colleagues down the road at South Norfolk invest considerably more than this in their wholly owned company, Big Sky. So actually, it just depends on the individual council's appetite. But we're certainly not proposing for Broadland an investment on the same scale as South Norfolk at the moment.
Okay. Right, Sue Catchbowl's next.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a point on that 3.4 we were just looking at. Increased Broadland growth reserve by 5 million, which sort of implies that there already is a Broadland growth reserve of an amount. Is this a new reserve?
No, it's not a new reserve. It already exists, and there is a balance in there at the moment of 2.1. Sorry, I apologise if you can hear any banging. I've got some builders in of 2177. So it's 2,177,000. So it would be adding to that reserve.
Thank you. And the other query was going back to the IT reserve. It's suggesting that we purchase our software, and I was just wondering, is that the sensible way to go into the future, when it seems that paying a monthly fee to borrow software seems to be what's happening, but I'm not so sure about that at council level. Maybe somebody knows that, whether not paying the full amount to buy software would be a sensible thing.
Again, I think you're right. This is how the IT market is changing. It used to be you buy the software, but there are more opportunities to do software as a service where you just buy that subscription for the number of users you need. I expect that this will be something that will come out of the methods work that's been done for overall strategy going forward. But as far as I'm aware, some of the main systems we use, like the planning system, there isn't yet an option out there in the market for a software as a service type offering for that type of facility. But that's not to say that within 18 months that may have changed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe it's Karen Lawrence next. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's in regard to 3.2 and the cost separation for the Marriott's Way and BVR. Thank you for the separation. It's a lot clearer. However, it's also quite concerning in that actually it's all estimated on 11.8 thousand per bridge or culvert. And given that BVR has not, due to circumstances, it has not, money hasn't been spent on the infrastructure for the last 10 years. My concern is that 11.8 thousand is certainly not going to be enough for the work that actually is required. So that's a concern, and whether actually to get the estimate and then to ensure that the infrastructure on bridges are safe, whether the Office of Road and Rail has been contacted to get kind of their take on that as a as the basis of the budget and therefore the reserve. And does that reserve include sort of the wire post boundaries, replacement gates and cattle grids inclusion that might be required as well, or is that a different budget reserve? So my concern is really that 270,000 for 23 bridges and culverts that have been neglected for the last 10 years is not enough money. Could we have a comment on kind of those estimates, please?
Rodney?
Thank you. I don't have those figures to hand. I do recall there's a report a while ago on the need for the expenditure on bridges, but I think I can understand Councillor Lawrence's concerns that actually, yes, these sums do look low considering the potential need that actually will be, because actually doing anything to a bridge is not a cheap piece of work sort of thing. I've known bridge works to easily swallow £250,000 on a single issue. So I think that is a fair comment for Overview and Scrutiny to be making, that actually we may need to be doing a piece of work to actually properly assess how much we'll need to spend on the bridges going forward. But as I say, I think there was a report on this a while back, but I would need to be able to dig that out and see what that was saying.
Yes, Rodney, I'll concur with you there. I remember this, and I think it was about. I remember seeing figures and report about 18 months ago, actually, which I think is just before your time. So perhaps it's a report that you've seen from then, but I do remember seeing figures, but I just can't remember exactly what they were. We've debated that one for a long time, Karen, as well, that we needed to make sure we've got these ring fenced, because there was a point in time, and Nigel Shaw will remember this, going back on ONS, where we had quite a debate about they need to be ring fenced, they need to be figures in there. They wasn't, so there's quite a bit of movements taking place here to get them ring fenced accordingly. But perhaps it's something we can pick up at the end when we summarise around perhaps a point around doing a bit of work, Rodney, as you say, to assess it in terms of Karen's point. Linda, have you picked up anybody else?
Councillor Adams has got a comment in chat, and Councillor Bullman has raised his hand for. And
did I see Nigel Brennan as well?
Yes, he's raised his hand.
Tony?
Yeah, this is a sort of a long-standing issue, and the reason why we're having to cough up so much more now is the fact that it was agreed by Broadland District Council about 15 years ago that we'd put £20,000 a year into a pot, so because we knew, and I think the estimate at that time for the repair of these and maintenance of these bridges would be about, in 15 years' time, about 460 to 600,000 pounds.
That's
This, of course, is an ongoing cost.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter whether Bure Valley Railway packs up or not. We are responsible for all time for those bridges and maintenance of other parts of the track, as Karen sort of rightly picked up. So I'm just asking that, given the fact that this is an ongoing commitment, and that in 10 to 15 years' time, another council somewhere else might well be looking at this sort of sum again, and should we not this time be putting a certain amount of money yearly on one side, properly ring fenced, so it can't be spent on other projects? So that's just a question to you, really, Rodney. Do you feel that, and I agree, I think you'll be lucky to get away with 270,000, but do you feel, Rodney, that given this is an ongoing commitment that we've got, that we should perhaps be looking to ring fence properly an annual budget of 20,000 a year to pay for future maintenance?
I can confirm to Councillor Adams, actually, we do set aside, I think it is £20,000 each year, which gets added to this reserve every year. So that is part of the ongoing sort of our budgets.
Thank you for that, Rodney. Let's hope this time that it stays in that budget, is all I can say. Right, thanks everybody.
Well remembered, Tony, because that was the things I was talking about and they eluded me then, so well remembered, Tony. And who have we got next? I think it was Peter and then Nigel. Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. The reserve for refuse collection of 3 million, that's to purchase vehicles, is it?
It's to help purchase vehicles.
Okay.
It wouldn't probably
Would
cover
we
the whole
not,
cost.
would we be buying, or would the owner be buying rather than leasing?
I do not. It will depend on the proposals put through by the tenderers. I say they might all put in different options, but you're right. There might be a
Leasing
leasing.
tends to be the way forward for most companies, doesn't it?
I say, I think there's probably only one refuse contractor that is very much in favour of the leasing. The other ones tend to like the councils to buy the vehicles outright.
Yeah.
But we'll be interested to see that as part of the discussions, because obviously with the procurement, we're going through a competitive dialogue process. So that's where we'll have the discussions with the contractors. And I'm sure that vehicle options will be part of those discussions.
So this would be a draw on our reserves, basically, would it?
Yes.
Quite different from the Broadland Growth Reserve, which is in fact not expenditure, more of an investment. So we're actually drawing down on our reserves to fund this, rather than trying to pay for it in revenue terms by leasing, for example. Is that a sensible option?
Right.
It's all the same, isn't it, Rodney?
Yeah. Well,
not really.
At the moment, nothing's off the table as to what's the best option to go forward. So actually, if we found that leasing vehicles was going to be the most cost-effective option, then that is what we'd do. If we think that is the purchasing vehicles is the most cost-effective option, that's what we will do. This
but if we purchase, we actually draw on reserves, so that money's gone.
Correct.
If we lease, that isn't the case, is it?
No, but there will be a revenue cost every year.
There'll be a revenue cost every year, that's right.
So how are we going to replace the 3 million is the question, I suppose, if it is capital expenditure, or are we not going to bother?
Again, I think you're absolutely right. Ideally, we'd put aside some money every year in order to top up a reserve in order to fund refuse vehicles when they become due again. So we might buy some now, which will last for 8-10 years. a prudent thing to do would be to set aside some money every year, so in 10 years' time, got some money again to purchase them. But that will depend on the overall financial situation of the council, whether we can afford to put some money aside, or whether actually in 10 years' time we may be in the position that actually our only option is to borrow to fund new vehicles.
Yeah, and this is what I'm aware. When we had the waste discussions as well, a number of authorities have gone down the road of putting in some capital themselves on owning the vehicles. A lot of them gone down the road of owning the vehicles themselves, because in actual fact, financially, it worked out better to do so. But then borrowed money for around 50% more in some cases. So that, as you say, Peter, you're not financing it all out of reserves. You've still got that to play with and invest with, and then with the low interest rates that exist out there, that could work out cheaper, and in some cases works out cheaper than leasing, because whatever way you look at it, the money's got to come from somewhere. So the leasing costs other councils have found to be higher than them borrowing to purchase vehicles. That's occurred in a number of councils now. But I think what you're saying, Rodney, is that this all's got to be all worked out, and that money's being put there as a reserve, but you don't know yet which road you're going to go down.
That's correct. Yes, it's prudently setting aside some money because it's quite likely we will need it, but obviously it's not definite to say. Like most reserves, you set them aside for potential need. It doesn't give you the authority to commit that expenditure. The actual commitment to buying vehicles or leasing vehicles will come through from that procurement option and the reports that will come through on the waste service going forward.
Yeah. Okey dokey. Was there anyone else, Linda? I can't see.
Councillor Brennan.
Oh yes, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to pick up on something that you touched on yourself early on in this discussion. I'm going to use a word that Rodney's just used about prudence, and I don't want to get bogged down on this IT business again, but we already have in the IT reserve £305,000. We're being asked to consider another £1.3 million, which is being set aside for prudence. But if we are being prudent with that money, should it become necessary, why were we asked earlier in this meeting to approve £50,000 spend on upgrading hardware and software in the council chamber if we've already got 305,000 sitting there and we now want another 1.3 million? To me, that doesn't make sense. If we've got the money there, then that's what it's supposed to be used for, surely, not just come cap in hand and we'll have a bit more, please, we'll have a bit more, please.
Chair, if I can come back on that one.
Rodney.
That 305 million in the IT reserve is already set aside in order to help fund the infrastructure works that have been agreed. So actually, that is committed to current plans. Therefore, the extra £50,000 we're talking about was in addition to the current plans, and therefore we haven't got any money to set aside to cover that.
Right, Nigel.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer, Chair. Thank you, Rodney. I just can't get my head around it. We can't drag up that previous conversation, but we were asked to approve £50,000 on the bench strength of a review, which where the tail was wagging the dog, saying it's going to cost us this amount of money. I do find this extremely difficult, but I'm going to leave it there. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do understand the point, Nigel. You know, and I picked up when you voted against. It actually wasn't against the amendment. It's actually against the point 4 proposal. I read that, Nigel, and I understand that. However, I had to reflect in the summary what the debate had been and where the majority of members are in the room, which I'm duty bound really as chair to do, which is why I put forward that recommendation, you know, as I should do as you know, as professional chair for us.
Oh yeah, no, I have no problem with what you did, Chair. No, that's fine. I just, as I said, it's this. We've got money sitting there. But we're now being told that 305,000 has already been earmarked. So it appears we know what that's going to be spent on. But so why haven't we spent it? And how can we? When was that money? That 305. When was that set aside? Was it a year ago? 2 years ago? Have the costs risen since then? Since that money was allocated? Are we going to be asked for more again? And when we say, oh, well, actually, that 305 wasn't quite enough for what we wanted because things have gone up. So when is it going to be spent? Is that another question I can ask? When are we going to spend that 305,000?
Rodney, I think if you just answer that last question and then we'll sum up, I think.
Unfortunately, I'd say I'm not the expert on how we're progressing with our IT projects, but other than that, we are doing significant amount of expenditure this year, and therefore that will be sort of spent. In many ways, I think this will become clearer when we start again look at the budget monitoring position. The budget monitoring position will show what we're going to spend this year, and therefore and how we're going to fund it. And also when we look at next year's budgets on the whole capital programme, because again, you'll be able to see this is what we plan to spend and this is how we plan to fund it. So in some ways, I appreciate it's difficult for members because you're only seeing one element of the picture at the moment, which is what we're just setting aside in the reserves. You're not seeing that the other side, which is what our plans are for spending this money.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to round up because we're really, it's 20 to 1. We've got one other item left on the agenda after this. So just sum up here. It's a good question on this because it's fleshed out some of the meaty stuff that's behind what's in the report. And I think that's been really helpful. We've got 1, 2 and 3. I'm just going back now to the point, Rodney, we mentioned earlier on that Karen originally raised as well. And I think Tony's, Tony actually come on to as well. And I think myself is that, so that's 3, is that, and your comment about could really do with a bit of work, some more work being done on what do we need realistically to be looking at to ensure that we do have future funds to cover the liabilities in regards to the bridges, etc. And I know you made reference to that as well. Is that really a recommendation or an amendment that we need to go through here, Rodney? Or would you, from our discussion today, and in terms of risk that's been pointed out, would you be prepared just to agree to that whoever would do that further bit of work for a report going forward at some point?
Right. I think, Jay, I think you're right, actually. These are recommendations to Cabinet. You're really much putting a request into officers to actually provide you some more information on the bridge maintenance reserve. So actually, I think that's just an item to note in the minutes, very much for members of this committee have asked for officers to provide some more information about the bridge maintenance need. And obviously we'll take that previous report, have a word with the director of place and actually see what we can bring back to members.
Thank you, Rodney, because I think that's a sensible way forward rather than, us going to Cabinet and then Cabinet agreeing that the report should be done or not. I think that's just the wrong way to go. So I appreciate that, Rodney. And I think, so as the committee, for the minute, in line with what we just said, an exchange between Rodney and that, so can we agree that, Rodney, that's indeed what we're asking Rodney to do, to come back with further report based upon the original figures that's mentioned at this meeting? Can we all agree to that? Yes.
Looks to be unanimous.
Thank you. Yes, and Sue, got you, Sue. Thank you. Brilliant. And we can minute that, as you say, Rodney. Thanks very much. So now moving back on to recommendations, we've got 1, 2 and 3. I'm not picking up any amendments or opposition here. So I guess really should put these to the vote. Do you want them separately or all together? I'll do them separately. How about that? So
all together, Chairman. I'm
okay,
I'm quite happy to second David taking all together.
Okay, I'll take that.
Chairman, sorry, you've also got a further recommendation under that for Cabinet.
We've got 1, 2, 3, and then we've got Cabinet to confirm the Assistant Director of Growth and Consultancy Portfolio Holder and Development has the authority to agree additional economic growth projects to be funded from the Economic Success Fund. Yeah.
Yes.
So we're clarifying?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to actually take 1, 2, and 3 because we've had a whole debate around that. Then just come on to that one. I think that's a fair thing to do. So 1, 2, and 3. Are we in favour of that those 3 recommendations? Okay.
Might be best to clarify. So we've got Councillor Prutton, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Creamy Govan-Lew, Councillor Brennan, Councillor Riley, Councillor Bullman, Councillor Lurden, Councillor Kelly, and Councillor Lee. And therefore, and then we've got Councillor Catchpole.
Yeah, sorry, Leah. I thought we'd agreed we needed to bring number 1 back a moment ago, so I'm a bit confused by including that one.
No, that's not what we agreed. So I'll clarify what we agreed.
Thank
what
you.
we agreed was that so this is the recommendations to Cabinet. We're not got an amendment going to Cabinet asking Cabinet to agree to the officers to do a report. We're not doing that. What we've actually agreed, and Rodney's agreed, is that the officers, based upon the previous report that was given in terms of the requirements and funding around the maintenance of the bridges, liability, that a further report is done and updates that report. Then again, that comes back to ONS for us to have a look at. And that's what was just agreed. So that doesn't affect these recommendations here. We've separated it out from Cabinet.
Yeah, I understand. No, thanks.
So I'm now need to check again on the vote. Should we do this again for you, Leah? I think it looks like we're going to have to. Okay, right. So this is 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. And that looks to be unanimous. If anyone wants to say, if
is
not,
there any against? Any against? No. Any abstentions? No. Okay. Thank you. So coming on to the last one. Cabinet's confirmed that the Assistant Director of Economic Growth in consultation with Portfolio Holder for Economic Development has the authority to agree additional economic growth projects to be funded from the Economic Success Fund. Do we all understand this? Sue, fire away. Anybody else?
Thank you. What is the Economic Success Fund, and how much is it worth? So what is it in total that we're giving authority for the AD to spend? Thanks.
Thank you. Rodney?
Do you want me just to pick up on the value on this one, Rodney, before you explain further?
No, go on, please, Maddie.
Who's speaking? Sorry, who just said that?
Sorry, it's Maddie, Steve.
Oh, Maddie, yes. Far away, Maddie.
Right, so the Economic Success Fund at the moment is 284,000. I'll pass over to Rodney.
Thank you.
This is actually a reserve that predated my time. I think originally there's nearly £700,000 worth set aside for economic success projects. We've spent about £400,000 on projects, and there's still £284,000 left to be allocated to projects. My understanding is that historically the projects being agreed from this fund were actually within the control of the relevant portfolio holder in conjunction with the relevant officer. So this recommendation is very much to try and follow up that same process that I understood was currently in place.
Just to help the committee, could you give an example of that money that has been spent, or if any other officer can, Maddie or whatever, the money that has been spent, so that people understand what the hell this means actually. Any money that has been spent in terms of, economic development, what it is, what's been spent on.
So can I come back to you in a minute? I just need to be able to go back to a file to have a look at that file. So if I could ask you to ask a couple other questions of Maddie in the meantime, I will find that information out.
Okey dokey. Yes, Maddie. Well, I'm not quite sure what choice. Do you like gardening, Maddie, or?
I've just had a big catio, Bill.
Oh, nice.
Not gardening though.
Hence the builders.
Yeah, that's the kitchen.
Yeah, do you prefer coffee or tea, Maddie?
Coffee.
Coffee. I'm a tea man myself. I'm a tea holic, actually. I can't survive without tea. I get the shakes. Right.
Unfortunately,
anybody else? Anna, what about you, Anna? Would you prefer tea or coffee?
I like them both. Depends on the time of day. I think that Rodney may have had a look now and found the files though, so I'll pass over to him.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Right,
No,
Rodney, I won't ask you what you prefer.
No, I'm just saying I'm having trouble finding this at the moment. I'll say my network's not quite letting me in at the moment, so so
would this be, Rodney? Would this be, for instance, I'm aware that there's some money spent in terms of making proposals, I think, under Phil's department. I think Debbie's gone, isn't she? Is Debbie still here?
I think there's one about tourist village signs.
Yes, that's right.
There's one about 200 years of famous gardener in the area. There's some work a couple of years on that ago.
Would it be helpful, Chairman, if we take this away and come back with a clarification after the meeting? Would that be a helpful way forward?
We can do that, Hannah. I think we've got stuck now, you see, because all through the meeting, all the focus has been around fleshing out the report around 1, 2, 3, and there's really not been anything on this last one. So if you come back after the meeting, we've just said, oh yes, we're agreeing to this, or we're not agreeing to this because we don't know why. Don't know why we're not agreeing, or we don't know why we're agreeing. And I think that's part of the problem here. The question that Sue asked was a relevant question, an answer to that. But of course, in terms of the figures, that 284. But what is it? What's the money been spent on? What does it actually produce? And without the report, no sort of officer present seems to know. It's a shame that Debbie's not here, because I've got a feeling that Debbie would know. And I think,
Chair, I don't know if you want to be quite unusual and actually take some on your other agenda item and come back to this, because you got the questions for overview and scrutiny that you could actually perhaps look at that.
Good
and
idea.
Then come back to this one in a few minutes.
Good idea. So we'll pop back in a minute. So we move on to the last item. Pop back. Good idea, Rodney. Like that. Right. So, budget questions for Cabinet. Now, as Chair, I've got to be quite ruthless here, I'm afraid. I believe in complete democracy within this committee. But, however, we did go through an exercise, a number of us, in pre-budget workshop. Was it last week? Was it? Time flies. And we spent quite a bit of time on that. You'll see from the budget questions that we have here, we split it into work groups. It's quite difficult on Zoom to do this. In the past, we've been in the council chamber, we had a working lunch, we split out, moved around tables. On Zoom, very difficult. I appreciate the officers' effort and time they put into this, but can't wait for COVID to be over. And you can see the three groups there. Unfortunately, this was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members that was present. We could have really done with more members. However, I guess people were busy. But this is what we came up with. We originally came up with 20 questions. We whittled it down to 14. And basically, because that's not a formalised public meeting process, etc., we just need to endorse these questions today. But you didn't take part in the members that didn't take part in the pre-budget workshop to arrive at these questions. I'm afraid you can't do it now. So we can't really do, because you actually have to be with the officers to arrive at the questions, and we can't do that process now. This is just a formal endorsement of the questions. That's number one in terms of proposal. Number two is we will then get written responses back from Cabinet to the questions. We will then have Cabinet attend our meeting to answer the questions. Way we've done this before is that we share out, we have a meeting, we share out amongst committee members a question each, a couple of questions each to ask. There can be supplementary questions. So that process needs to be facilitated. We've got a timing issue here. Our next meeting's now not until January. And I think it's the 5th of January, the officer correct me if I'm wrong on that. Now, if we look at the budget situation, what's got to occur there in terms of formulating the budget, we really do need to have the Cabinet attending on the 5th of January. But what we do need to do, though, is actually have a look at the written questions that come back. When we get the written questions, we may say, on question 2 and question 5, we're happy with that. We actually don't want to verbalise this. We don't want to put it to them in a verbal sense at the meeting. However, the other ones we do. So we look process meeting to sort that out and sort out who's going to ask the questions. So in between now and the 5th of January, we'll receive the written questions back. The admins, we had a meeting the other day about this, and the admin's going to chase them up to see, how quickly we get those back. Once we know when we're getting them back, then the intention would be for us to set up a informal meeting, if you like. This isn't a meeting for the public, where we would simply have one agenda item, and it simply be to go through. These are written answers. Are we happy not to ask them on that one? That one, we're satisfied with that. And now let's all agree who is actually going to ask the questions and any supplementaries on the Cabinet to attend. So we would have to then notify out when that meeting would be. It'd be a one-item meeting sometime between now and 5th January. Obviously not Christmas Day or New Year's Day. There's another way of dealing with it, unfortunately. But it should be a short meeting, one item only. And is that kind of understood the process we need to apply? So I'll put the questions formally to you now, as outlined on 49 and 59, 49 and 50. Questions 1 through to 14. Can we formally endorse those, please? Show of hands.
That looks unanimous.
Thank you very much. And obviously we'll get out as soon as we know when the questions are going to be answered and come back to us in written form. Then with the administration, we'll get out to you, a date for attending as I said, short one-item only meeting to prepare for the Cabinet questions on the 5th of January. And please all just try and attend that. It shouldn't be a long meeting. And we can even sit there with a nice cup of coffee if you want. Right, Rodney. And if we can minute all that up as well, please. Jessica. So Rodney, have you been able to find it?
I have indeed, Chair. So
well done, Rodney. You're brilliant.
So as I say, we originally set aside £655,000 for these sort of projects. We spent 372,000 to date. And the sort of thing that's been spent on is we had some money for business enterprise grants, youth employment support, money in the past for Tour of Britain, the Humphrey Repton celebration, and it's projects, various little projects like that have come back in the past. And overall there's about 20 different projects that have been funded in the past. Looking ahead for this £282,000 that's left, we've got some money that's potentially allocated to the future High Street. But I haven't got much details on that. We've got a little bit we're still spending on the Reedham Village tourism sign project, which I believe is ongoing. And then we have in total about 160,000 that hasn't yet been allocated to a project. So essentially we're looking for the agreement that the AD for economic growth and environment economic development portfolio holder would have the ability to actually agree what projects would come out of that unallocated funding. I don't know if that's helpful.
Could we? I think that's very, very helpful. Economic Success Fund. There's a link here to the Economic Success Panel, and I've now, a lot of what you said, Rodney's come back in. The Humphrey Repton situation, for instance, spending some money, it's a promotional thing. The ward members in that area should have been invited. There never was, which is another issue. But there you go. But I think in terms of where these pots of money are being spent, perhaps also we could just make an amendment here saying, could the Economic Success Panel be informed of the projects that are being supported by this fund? I think that'd be the responsible thing to do for the Economic Success Panel. Could we agree this with that recommendation? With that amendment, sorry. Yes. Okie dokie. Just before we vote on that, just need that read back, please. Is it Jessica, you right taking this?
Yep, so you want to add an amendment that the Economic Success Panel can be informed should be informed
on the projects that the fund supports.
Yep, on any upcoming projects. Yep.
Yep, brilliant. Okie, right. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
Unanimous.
Thank you very much. Okie, thanks a lot. Okay, well, thanks officers for all the support you've given today. Thank you committee. We might have a meeting before Christmas. If not, it'll have to be on the 4th of January, if that's actually a working day. I don't even know if it is or not, but hopefully we'll get that done before Christmas. And everybody stay safe. If I don't see you, have a good